There is a quiet battle happening inside your brain every single day. It's not loud or dramatic, but it's relentless. And what makes it most exhausting is that you always know exactly what you should be doing. Waking up earlier, focusing more deeply, finishing the important work instead of dragging it out, starting the thing you promised yourself you would start a long time ago. You know it's right. You know it matters. And yet you still delay. You still say, I'll do it in a bit. You still give yourself one more excuse, one more small gap to escape that initial discomfort. As the day slowly comes to an end, the familiar feeling returns. A low, persistent restlessness. Silent self-blame that doesn't need words. You start asking yourself the same old questions. Why am I always like this? Why do I lack discipline? Why can other people do it, but I can't? Then the next morning arrives with a bit of fresh hope, and the loop begins again exactly as before. You know what matters. You procrastinate, you blame yourself, and then you procrastinate again. Here's the paradox. Your brain isn't stupid. It's the product of hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, designed to help you survive, learn, adapt, and overcome challenges. So why is it the very thing that keeps holding you back whenever you try to do something difficult but meaningful? We're often taught that this is a problem of willpower, that you need to be stronger, more disciplined, more determined. And that's where modern motivation comes in, forcing yourself, pushing harder, burning bright for a short time, then burning out. You try to run faster on the same road that already exhausted you. You push yourself past your limits while your brain was never trained to move with you. The result is almost always the same: a few days of excitement, followed by discouragement that comes back deeper and heavier than before. But what if the problem isn't that you lack willpower? What if your brain isn't fighting you but trying to protect you? From the brain's perspective, everything revolves around energy and safety. Anything that causes stress, discomfort, pain, or lacks a clear reward gets labeled as unnecessary energy loss. And the brain's job is to avoid those things. So when you procrastinate, it's not a sign of laziness. It's a deeply ingrained protective response. How many times have you promised yourself that this time would be different, only to break that promise again? Not because you're weak, but because you've been speaking to your brain in the wrong language. The Lotus Method starts from a completely different place. It doesn't force the brain to do hard things through raw willpower. It teaches the brain not to fear discomfort, to accept it as a natural part of the process, and eventually to choose the harder path when that path has meaning. This isn't a trick to boost motivation. It's not a productivity formula that works for a few weeks. It's an entirely different way of understanding suffering, discipline, and human growth. And to understand why this perspective exists, we need to return to a true story, one where discipline wasn't a choice, but a way of life. That story takes us back to 12th century Japan, to a time when discipline wasn't a topic for discussion, it was a condition for survival. There lived a warrior monk named Benkei, known everywhere for his extraordinary strength and his fierce temper. Benkei lacked neither talent nor courage. He was tall, powerful, carrying a massive naginata that few could even wield, and he believed his strength alone was enough to overcome anyone who stood in his way. But that very belief kept Benkei locked in constant conflict. He used force to prove his worth, aggression to mask the insecurity beneath it, and treated every confrontation as a battle that had to be won. Until one day he encountered Yoshitsune, a samurai smaller in stature, calmer in presence, and utterly unlike any opponent Benkei had ever defeated. The fight did not last long. Benkei lost, not only physically but mentally as well. For the first time in his life, he realized that raw strength was not enough. The ego he had built for so long collapsed in that moment. And this is the crucial point: Benkei did not run from that failure. He could have blamed circumstances. He could have lashed out in anger or resentment, or tried to redeem himself through another confrontation. But Benkei chose none of that. Instead, he bowed before Yoshitsune and asked to follow him as a disciple. That was not the act of a weak man, it was the decision of someone who had just faced the limits of who he was. That moment marked a true transformation. Benkei no longer chose the easier path of defending his old identity. He chose the harder one: discipline training, enduring hunger, cold exhaustion, and pain through the years that followed. Not to prove anything to others, but to become someone else. Every major turning point in life begins with a sentence that is simple, yet incredibly hard to accept. I can't continue being the person I used to be. Have you ever experienced a failure that you knew deep down that if you avoided it, you would never truly grow? But what made Benki a legend was not his victories. Benki's story is not just a fragment of history, it is a metaphor for how human beings grow when they stop running from what is difficult. And to understand more deeply the path he chose, we need a symbol that can hold the essence of that spirit. That symbol is the lotus flower. The lotus does not grow on dry land, nor does it wait for perfect conditions to rise. It is born in mud, grows in mud, surrounded by murky water and darkness. But the lotus does not fight the mud, nor does it try to avoid it. It moves through the mud slowly and steadily until it reaches the light and blooms. Not in spite of adversity, but because of it. Modern humans are different. We tend to wait. We wait until we feel more ready, more confident, less tired, less afraid. We believe we need to be in the right state before we begin, but the truth is that state rarely arrives. And while we wait, we remain stuck. Not because we lack ability, but because we've grown accustomed to avoiding the initial discomfort. This is a very common misunderstanding. We think suffering makes us weaker. In reality, what drains you is not difficulty itself, but the constant act of running from it. Each time you avoid discomfort, your brain learns that difficulty is dangerous. And the next time it reacts even more strongly, making it even harder for you to begin. The lotus teaches a completely different lesson. Growth does not come from removing the mud, but from learning how to move through it. That is also the core spirit of the Lotus Method. This is not a path designed to help you avoid hardship, but a mental map that teaches you how to step into difficulty deliberately, one step at a time, until you are strong enough to bloom in the very environment that once frightened you. If the lotus is the symbol of moving through hardship, then nintai is the very first step on that path. In Japanese, nintai is often translated as endurance, but not the kind that grits its teeth or forces itself to the point of collapse. Nintai is conscious endurance, the ability to stay with what is difficult without panicking, without running away, without urgently trying to escape. Most of us quit not because the task itself is too hard, but because the initial feeling is too uncomfortable. Tension, restlessness, mental heaviness, fear of making mistakes, fear of failure. The moment these signals appear, the brain immediately switches into alarm mode. And following old habits, you retreat. You procrastinate, switch to something else, and look for something easier to soothe the discomfort. Neuroscience calls the ability to stay with discomfort psychological flexibility. It is the capacity to notice I am uncomfortable without letting that feeling control your behavior. People with high psychological flexibility don't need to like difficulty. They simply don't let discomfort decide for them. A major misunderstanding is the belief that the brain hates effort. It doesn't. The brain only hates effort that feels meaningless. When you push into something difficult without understanding why you're enduring it, the brain labels it as wasted energy and tries to pull you away. But when you show the brain that this difficulty has purpose, direction, and an endpoint, its response begins to change. Practicing nintai is not complicated, but it requires honesty with yourself. When discomfort appears, the first step is not to push it away. Acknowledge it. Name it in your mind: tension, fear, laziness, heaviness. Then slow your breathing. Not to become perfectly calm, just enough to avoid panic. And then continue acting at the smallest possible level. Not to finish the task, but simply not run away. You usually quit right at this stage, don't you? The moment things start to feel difficult, you pull back before realizing that you could have stayed just a little longer. And here's the key point. Once you move past this step, the hardest part will no longer be the emotion itself. Once you've learned how to stay with discomfort, the next question naturally arises: how do you begin when your body and emotions still feel heavy? This is where shisei comes in. In samurai tradition, shisei is not just a stance or the way one holds a sword. It is the state of the body when stepping into a challenge. A samurai may feel fear, but his posture must not collapse. Because they understood one thing clearly: the body always leads the mind. Today's science refers to this as embodied cognition, the idea that thinking and perception are shaped by the body. The way you stand, the way you breathe, the way you move sends direct signals to the brain that this situation is manageable. In contrast, when you hunch your back, hold your breath, and shrink inward, the brain receives a message of danger, and pulls you back toward familiar safety. This is where we need to break a very common belief: you do not need to feel confident before you begin. In reality, confidence appears after you begin. Waiting for the right feeling before acting is like waiting for the water to become perfectly still before learning to swim. It rarely happens. People move forward not because they are less afraid, but because they act even while fear is present. Practicing shisei starts with very small actions. Before doing something difficult, adjust your posture. Sit upright or stand firmly, feet grounded on the floor. Take a deep breath and let it out more slowly than usual. Don't try to eliminate discomfort, just show your body that you are present. Then begin with a deliberate movement, no matter how small. Open the document. Write one line. Make one motion. This small action is a powerful signal to the brain that you are moving forward, not running away. And this is where we need a mental shift. The Lotus Method was not created to make everything easier. It does not promise that the road ahead will be less steep or less painful. What it does is change you. When you repeat this process long enough, you become steadier, calmer, and less easily pulled around by emotion. The truth is, the hard path never disappears. Every level of growth comes with its own form of difficulty. But when you change, what once frightened you begins to feel familiar, not because it became lighter, but because you became stronger walking through it. And this is exactly where most people quit. Not because it is too hard, but because they fail to recognize how far they have already come. Once you have begun to act, once you've learned how to remain steady in discomfort and keep moving forward even when results don't appear right away, an important question emerges: how do you avoid quitting halfway through? Because for most people, the problem isn't starting. It's not sustaining the effort long enough for real change to take place. This is where kanso becomes decisive. In samurai tradition, reflection was not self-doubt or self-punishment. It was a disciplined act. After each period of training or each battle, they took time to look back with clarity: what was done well, what wasn't, and what had changed. Not to indulge in pride and not to drown in self-blame, but to keep the path ahead clear. Modern science explains this quite simply. The brain needs evidence to continue investing energy. If you put in effort without acknowledging progress, the brain concludes that the effort is pointless. And once something is labeled pointless, the brain will try to eliminate it. This is why so many people do the right things, try hard enough, and yet gradually lose motivation without understanding why. Without reflection, you allow the brain to forget what you've already endured. Each day you tolerate a little more, move one step further. But if you never pause to see it, the brain never learns that this path is worth continuing. Kanso is how you teach the brain to recognize: we are making progress. This effort has meaning. Practicing kanso doesn't need to be complicated. What matters is consistency. Record small wins even when they seem insignificant. A day you didn't quit, a moment when you started despite resistance, a session where you stayed with a difficult task longer than usual. These are exactly the data points your brain needs. Each week, take a short moment to look back and ask yourself, what did I get through? And what did I learn from the times I didn't run away? Do you remember the last time you overcame something difficult that you once believed was impossible? If you don't, it may not be because you haven't moved forward, but because you never stopped long enough to see yourself growing. When you've learned to stay with difficulty, begun to act even without the right feelings, and learned how to see your own progress, a quiet transformation begins to take place. This is no longer a story about methods or techniques. This is where kaka emerges, the stage where discipline moves beyond behavior and becomes identity. In ancient language, kaka carries the meaning of transcendence, not rising above others, but rising above your former self. At this stage, you no longer ask, should I do this? The question shifts to, what kind of person am I? When identity changes, behavior follows naturally without force. Science calls this process neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change. Every action you repeat, especially under conditions of discomfort, leaves a neural trace. At first, these traces are faint, but repeated over time, they become familiar pathways. Eventually, choosing the harder path no longer feels like effort. It becomes reflex. This is where many people misunderstand discipline. They believe discipline means forcing yourself to do what you don't want to do. But real discipline begins when you stop negotiating with yourself. There are no more extended internal debates, no weighing whether to act or not. You act because this is who you have chosen to be. Practicing kaka doesn't require a dramatic change. It begins with one small hard thing each day. Not to punish yourself, not to prove anything to others, but to reinforce a quiet sentence in your mind: I am someone who does not run away. Each time you act this way, that identity is etched a little deeper. What matters is consistency, not intensity. A small action repeated steadily shapes who you become far more powerfully than bursts of effort followed by abandonment. Over time, you no longer need motivation to do hard things because doing hard things has become part of you. If you live this way for 30 days, not perfectly, just without running away, who do you think you would become? In the end, everything comes down to a very simple choice and also a very difficult one. In this life, there seem to be only two kinds of people. The first are those who keep waiting for circumstances to change. They wait until they feel ready enough, confident enough, comfortable enough, less afraid. They believe that when everything is finally right, they will begin. But that moment rarely arrives. And while they wait, time passes, opportunities close, and they remain standing still. The second kind are those who choose to move through the mud. They are not braver and they are not less afraid. The only difference is that they do not wait for the mud to disappear. They step into it consciously, one step at a time, accepting that the path will be dirty, heavy, and uncomfortable. And because of that, they grow. Benki stood before this very choice in the moment of his defeat. He could have walked away, protected his old ego, and continued living by strength and anger. But he chose to bow. He chose discipline. He chose the longer, harder path. The lotus does the same. It does not bloom because conditions are perfect, but because it dares to move through the mud in search of light. The Lotus Method is not a secret trick, but a journey made of 4 clear stages. Nintai teaches you to stay with difficulty instead of running away. Shisei helps you act even when your emotions are not ready. Kanso reminds you to look back and see that you are moving forward. And Kaka is where all of these come together as the person you become. There is no magic here, only a choice repeated every day between returning to safety or taking one more step into difficulty. You don't need to answer me. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. But there is one question you cannot avoid forever today: which path will you choose?